For a lot of you that watch videos on this channel, I assume you go to a lot of live concerts. Actually, I don't even assume, I know that's the case because this whole channel revolves around the music industry, and I see the comments that you guys leave on this channel. And lately, we've been really covering a lot of videos on merchandise and the drama surrounding the modern merchandise for bands, whether it's the high prices or the merchandise fees that go to the venues. But mainly lately, it's been tipping. And every time we talk about tipping, I see people ask, and sometimes not even ask, sometimes people very aggressively just throw the statement out, well, why am I expected to tip a merchandise manager for a band that's just handed me a shirt that I already paid $45 for? Well, if you don't want to watch the whole video, I'll just give you the answer now. You don't have to. And you're not expected to. It's just a kind thing to do that is very appreciated. But if you are interested in a little bit of history and want to find out how this became a thing in the music industry, I want to take some time to actually dive into the history of gratuity and tipping in the US and kind of go a little further and explain how that's made its way into the music industry and how it's affecting everything. And since we're on the topic of money, let's just take a quick second to talk about the sponsor of today's video, Rocket Money. As I've been getting older in life, I'm really thinking about the future and saving money and balancing my budget better. But with all of our hectic schedules, sometimes staying on top of your finances can be pretty difficult. It is for me because I'm on tour all the time. Well, that's where Rocket Money can help out. If you're trying to save more and manage your money better, Rocket Money is the app that you need. It's a personal finance app that lets you check your credit score, create custom budgets, grow your savings, lower your bills, and even manage and cancel subscriptions, sometimes to things that you may not even know you're paying for. I sign up for a lot of things and a lot of free trials, and sometimes I forget to cancel stuff. Well, in the Rocket Money app, I can just go in there, look at it, see all the things that I have subscriptions for, and in just a couple taps, cancel those subscriptions in the app. So no more annoying customer service calls. Rocket Money has helped its customers save up to $740 per year when using all of the premium features of the app, with over 500 million saved in canceled subscriptions. So yes, it works. So if you want to take control of your finances, come join the over 5 million members using Rocket Money today. You can go to rocketmoney.com/TankTheTech or simply click the link in the description or the pinned comment to get started for free. So one more time, thank you to Rocket Money for once again sponsoring one of my videos. Thank you for taking the time to watch this. And now let's jump back in. So let's start at the very beginning, the history of gratuity and tipping in the United States. I think a lot of people are very familiar with that story where TIP is actually an acronym for to ensure promptness. If somebody does a good job, you leave them a tip. It's actually kind of a myth. There's nobody that's ever really confirmed that that's really a real thing. Other people talk about how Europeans that came to the US brought that tipping custom with them. And other people talk about how Americans traveling abroad brought tipping customs back to the US with them. But most historians actually say the truther is close to wealthy Americans just discovering this tipping tradition in the mid-1800s. This is something that goes back to medieval times when people had serfs and servants in their homes, and when people would visit, those guests would give a tip to those servants if they did some kind of exceptional service. These wealthy Americans that found out about this wanted to seem aristocratic, so they started doing it in the US. Now, believe it or not, a lot of American businesses were very against this tipping thing at first. They thought it was very classist and wondered how low-income Americans would be able to afford going out to restaurants and paying for food and then putting a tip on top of that. In fact, the whole anti-tipping attitude about everything was so strong that by the 1860s, that attitude also made it to Europe and stuck, which is why today, at most restaurants and service industry places in Europe, tipping is not really expected. But in the US, America, fuck yeah, that anti-tipping attitude kind of just vanished, and businesses actually got on board with this. And a big cause of that was actually the end of the Civil War and the end of slavery. When the Civil War ended, America's workforce exploded. And a lot of the people that joined that workforce were formerly enslaved people. But not only that, A lot of immigrants came over here to work too. And a lot of businesses thought that they could take advantage of the fact that there were so many of these people that were deemed low income and lowly educated and stuff like that. So they figured they could get them for either a very, 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 very low wage or sometimes nothing at all. And then they decided to pass off the wages to the customer by encouraging them to tip these people that were working for them. And businesses loved this because they realized that they could cut their costs by passing on the wages of their employees to the customers that were coming to their business. Now, even though these businesses were in favor of this, not everybody was. In the mid-1910s, there were actually some states that made tipping illegal at their businesses. Some states even deemed them commercial bribes. However, within the next 10 years, all of these laws that had passed to make these tipping situations illegal and stuff were eventually repealed, and then tipping actually became a normal thing across the entire US. Now, since it seemed like tipping was here to stay in the US by that point, the federal government actually passed some laws in the 1930s that required employers to pay their employees a wage that would add up to the federal minimum wage on top of the tips that they were already getting. And then in the 1970s, the federal government again passed some laws to give fair wages to restaurant workers. However, when you look at it on paper, those wages don't really look that fair. The current federal minimum wage in the United States is $7.25 an hour. And that doesn't apply to restaurant workers and service industry workers. Their federal minimum wage is actually $2.13 an hour and has been that way for quite some time. Now, it would be fair to point out that that $2.13 minimum wage is specifically for people that are working off of tips. So like restaurant workers, bartenders, hairstylists, stuff like that. And employers are required to match that federal minimum wage if their employees don't make enough tips to make it up to that $7.25 per hour. But that almost never happens. So effectively, a lot of these businesses are employing people for $2.13 an hour, while the consumer is basically making up the rest of their wages. And as a reminder, that is federal minimum wages. There are some states in this country that are actually way higher than that. There are some states that actually pay restaurant workers a pretty good minimum wage on top of the tips they receive. But a lot of these businesses like to jump on the defense that tips motivate their employees to work harder. And it does kind of make sense if you think about it. If you think you're working for a tip, of course you're going to try harder. However, there have been actual studies done that have found that tips are not really a good motivator for hard work. And they've actually found that there's almost no correlation between tipping and somebody's actual work performance. So that really begs the question, if tipping isn't really a motivator for people to work harder, then why not just pay them a good wage to begin with and get rid of tipping? Well, the businesses love that they've passed on those wages to the consumer and they don't have to worry about it. And in the day and age that we're in right now, I can tell you as an American, having been born and raised here, this whole tipping culture thing is completely normalized in our brains. I know there's a lot of Europeans and people from other countries that watch this channel, and I know a lot of this sounds crazy to you guys, but I think this is just the thing for Americans, that we're so used to this that it's ingrained in our brains at this point. But in the last few years, I've actually seen a lot of Americans be very outspoken about it. It seems like a lot of people are finally starting to realize that we're the ones kind of getting shafted here, paying the wages to employees that employers should pay. There's been terms going around like tipflation, and people are feeling like they're tip guilted everywhere we go, because it literally seems like everywhere we go now, we're asked to tip for anything, not even just service industry stuff anymore. According to a Lending Tree survey from just last year, 60% of all Americans say that they tip everywhere they go. And another 25% of those Americans say that they feel guilty about not tipping if they ever get presented the option, so they do. But that's about it for the whole history of why tipping is a thing in the US. And I want to kind of correlate that to the music industry now and why it's become a thing with merchandise. But real quick, one last thing that is very important to bring up before we dive into the merchandise stuff. It is actually illegal for employers to take tips from their employees. And not just employers, but like managers and people in managerial positions too. Unless there's already a pre-existing tipping pool in place at a business, it is 100% illegal for managers, employees, supervisors to take tips from employees. The reason I bring that up is because that is very important for what we are going to be talking about with merchandise. Now, when it comes to merch managers in the music industry, historically, they've kind of gotten a bad rap at times. And I'm not talking about from the band's fans and stuff. I'm talking about from other people in the touring world. There is a weird unspoken hierarchy in the touring music world, like a totem pole, if you will. If tour managers are at the top, or you put the bands at the top above them, you got tour managers, production managers, stage crew, you keep going down, and merchandise managers are usually towards the bottom. And I say this as somebody who's a tour manager now, and who used to be a merchandise manager for many, many, many years. I experienced this myself. And the crazy thing about that to me is that merchandise managers are the one person on a tour that's not an expense. They're actually an income. They're the direct line between a band and their fans. Sometimes they're the closest fans get to a band, and they're the ones that are selling merchandise and making a profit for the band. So why merchandise managers are constantly getting shit on a lot of the times, I will never fully understand, but it's not just in the social space of the tour, it's also in the business sense too. Since the merchandise managers are at times often thought of as being kind of low on the totem pole, their wages reflect that too. They're usually paid a lot less than other touring people, which is where nowadays the tipping is coming in. A lot of these bands and their management have realized that they can offer a very low wage to merchandise managers, but then tell them that they can keep tips if they put a tip jar at the merch table, which, just like a lot of these businesses in the US, effectively puts their wages on the band's fans, the consumers. I'm on a lot of private Facebook groups and a lot of email chains that often send out job listings for touring positions, and sometimes those positions are for merchandise managers. And the wages and salaries that I'm seeing being offered to merchandise managers nowadays are abysmal compared to a lot of the stage crew and other people on a tour. Most of the offers I see nowadays for merchandise managers or vendors for shows are anywhere between $100 and $150, sometimes $200 a show, but they always throw on plus tips at the end of it. And just to give you a real world example of the pay difference between some of these positions, when I was a full-time guitar tech right before the pandemic, I was actually on a yearly salary. So I was getting paid the same every week, no matter how many shows we did. But if you broke down that number based on how many shows we were actually doing a year, I was probably making anywhere between $650 and $700 per show day just as a guitar tech. So you can see there's a huge difference for the merchandise manager that's getting offered $150 when they're the ones making money for the band. But again, they're getting told they get to keep tips. So of course they're going to put tip jars out and fans are going to tip them to make up for their wages. But it's kind of backfired in a really funny way, because while these bands are offering low wages to merchandise managers but telling them they can keep the tips, in the past couple of years, we've actually seen some bands go public when they find out how much in tips that their merchandise manager is making, and they get mad about it. They're like, oh, this is unfair. We found out how much our merchandise manager is getting tipped, and we think it's unfair because people are thinking they're tipping the band, but they're tipping our merch person, and they're making more than us. Well, sorry, you kind of did that to yourselves by telling your merch manager that they can keep tips instead of paying them a fair wage. And that's something we've talked about on this channel. And I've even given the bands the benefit of the doubt with that statement when they say, our fans think they're tipping us. And I've asked you guys in comments, in polls, where do you think tips are going when you tip somebody at a merch stand? Most of the time, over 90% of you are well aware that when you're leaving tips, it's going to the person selling the merch and not the band. And unfortunately, very recently, we've actually seen some bands in the news that are trying to now take these tips from their merchandise managers. And they're making it sound like it's not fair. The merchandise manager is keeping all the tips and we're going to take them and we're going to split them with everybody. Well, going back to what I was already talking about, that is illegal. It is illegal for an employer to take tips from their tipped employees. And I'll say the same thing now that I've said before. If you're in a band or you're a crew member and you found out that the merchandise manager might be making more money from you, if you want in on those tips, become a merchandise manager and go help sell. It's really that easy. When it comes to being in the music industry and working for bands, every single person negotiates their pay and their salary before a tour starts. If you work for a band on the road and you've negotiated your pay before that tour started, and then you get on that tour and you find out that the merchandise manager is making a bunch of tips and they're making more than you and you're upset about it, it's not their fault. You negotiated your own salary. And to be honest, in the middle of a tour, it's really none of your business. Now, I will say, I am definitely in favor of people talking about their wages with each other, especially in the music industry, because that's how it stays transparent. And that's how people know that, or not know that, but find out what they should be getting paid and what is fair. But when you're in the middle of a tour, that's the wrong time for that. You've already negotiated your salary. You can't be mad at that person for getting tips and sometimes making more than you are. But to kind of finalize things here, I don't think this is going to go away anytime soon, even though people are noticeably getting more and more frustrated about the entire tipping culture. It's been going on for so long in the United States that I think it's just ingrained into everybody's brains. And the unfortunate thing is, in a lot of situations, merchandise managers specifically, if somebody says no because they don't like the low wage they're getting offered, there's going to be somebody else that's going to take that job. And these bands and these employers know that, because there are always people that want to get on the road and work. And if you ask for more money, they may just say no and hire somebody else. And that's just the unfortunate truth about our industry. But after diving into the history of tipping in the US and how it's made its way into merchandise in the music industry, I'm curious to know what you guys think, because the whole reason I did this video is because there was a lot of people that said that they don't understand tipping culture. And if you're from another country, maybe this gives you a little better idea of why this has become so normalized here, even if it's not necessarily the right thing that should be going on. But thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. Again, if you'd like to join me on Twitch, you can go to twitch.tv/TankTheTech. We usually talk about music news as it comes up and stuff like that. You can follow me on a ton of different social media. My handle on just about everything is @TankTheTech. But again, thank you. Wherever you are in the world, be safe, be kind to each other. I love you all, and I will be back very soon.